Money FM 89.3, best of weekends.
Joining us now, Dr. Denis Hew, the director of the APEC Policy Support Unit. Dennis, welcome to Money FM.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me? Am I loud and clear?
I can hear you. It's
great.
Thanks.
So, we just had the APEC leaders meeting just last Friday, and the ministers also met on Monday. And one of the things that they agreed on is to work together to essentially combat the COVID-19 pandemic and to find ways to facilitate greater trade, particularly in essential goods. We're talking about medical supplies as well as certain types of food staples, reducing trade barriers, if they can, also to try to reduce some of these tariffs on some of these essential goods. So I think these are some of the things that they're trying to do. And we know that's important, partly because trade has contracted quite dramatically this year, both exports and imports. And we're looking at the APEC region contracting by about 2.5% this year. That's about, in terms of output losses, about $1.8 trillion US. If you look at unemployment, we're looking at over 74 million people are looking for work. So it is pretty dramatic this year.
Dennis, it is, as you rightly mentioned, such a traumatic year. It follows 2019, where we had the U.S.-China trade war, which didn't do anybody any favors across the region, obviously. And now with COVID-19 and all of the turmoil that has brought on the region, do you sense that there is a shared sense of resolve among the APEC leaders to come together to really try to figure out what these solutions should look like in a time of unprecedented challenges? I
think they do. We have to realize that this is both a public health crisis as well as an economic crisis. Practically all the economies are suffering from recession as well as businesses being shut down and affecting everyone in terms of their daily lives. So if you look at the leaders' statement, there are a number of initiatives that they're trying to work on, including, for example, looking at a digital platform for information sharing, sharing of health data, some of the measures that are taken, like contact tracing, and looking at best practice. That's what we're good at, right? Seeing who has been successful in terms of containing the pandemic and whether we can learn from each other. So some of the things, besides trade, of course, these are some of the things that we can do to share information with each other.
Do you sense that there is a sense of urgency? As you well know, with many of the multilateral organizations, sometimes the pace of change is not as fast as people would like it to occur. Do you sense that there is a different sense of timeline to enact some of these initiatives to get people together based on the severity of the economic situation we're in now?
I think there is a greater sense of urgency. It's telling, right? Everyone is basically economically suffering from this pandemic. And so I think because of that, I think there is a greater sense of urgency to work together. So I think that's one. And two, APEC is not a legally binding forum. So it makes things a lot easier, right? So they can work together on new ideas and they can get it running in terms of initiatives a lot quicker than, say, much more legalistic or legally binding forums. So that's one of our benefits.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was quite a big group this time. You had all 10 ASEAN members. China joined, Australia, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, all coming together to put pen to paper on these ideas and this concept. What does that say now that the gathering is actually expanding a little bit about the importance of countries coming together during these economic times?
Well, for ASEAN, it's only 7 out of 10 ASEAN members are part of APEC.
Excuse me.
But yeah, having said that, I think there is this sense of urgency both among developing and developed economies to try to work together. And I mentioned to you earlier, one of the things that they can do is to look at a sort of a pandemic preparedness policy toolkit. At the individual economy level, they're doing something, but there is an advantage for all of them pooling their resources together to see whether they can share data as well as other types of measures, including looking at vaccines, right? Sharing of information. We know that there's now a couple of vaccines that are beginning to be effective. What can be done for them to look at issues of distribution once there's a massive rollout of these vaccines? So these are some valuable information that they can share among themselves.
Yeah. Were there any concrete steps or concrete outcomes to come out of this. X will be done by such and such a date, such and such a year. Anything specific that we can, hang our hats on?
Well, I think one of the things that they've already planning to launch very soon is a digital platform. And that digital platform is focusing on basically COVID-19. What are the measures that different economies are doing? And it's that digital platform, I think, will be useful for all economies, whether you're in the health sector or whether you're a trade official. So that's something that's it's being rolled out pretty soon. That's one of the things that they're already starting to do.
We're speaking with Dr. Denis Hew, Director of the APEC Policy Support Unit, getting us up to speed on the recent meeting of the APEC ministers. The virtual meeting was hosted by the Malaysian Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin. These discussions focused on combating the pandemic, as Denis has just mentioned, and also the trade tensions that have been happening. And interesting, Chinese President Xi Jinping was there, and he said that he would favorably consider joining the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP. I want to make sure I get the acronym right. Was that a surprise to anybody, or what was the feeling when he indicated that he would look favorably on considering that?
We've heard it before, being mentioned by certain Chinese officials, but I think this is perhaps quite an important announcement if they do plan to eventually join CPTPP. I don't know whether you know, it's a much higher quality type of free trade agreement compared to the one that was recently signed, the RCEP, which is an ASEAN plus 5 free trade agreement.
Right.
But it's a big deal if they are able to join CPTPP because this is one of the world's largest free trade agreements.
Yeah, very interesting. Denis, where do we go from here? You mentioned the new website. The digital element of the meeting will be one of the first things to be rolled out. What other steps are we looking forward to? What other timelines are we looking forward to following the APEC meeting? As you mentioned, these things are non-binding, but in good faith, people want to see progress made.
Right. Well, one of the things that came out of the leaders' meeting was a new vision for APEC. It's called the Putrajaya Vision 2040. So if you look at that vision statement, which is already out on the website, they do mention that they will continue to build on what they've done, with what we do best, basically promoting trade and investment, economic technical cooperation, but also to address some of the emerging challenges that's going on right now and that will continue over the next 10 years. One of them is looking at pandemics as well as other types of emergencies because there will be other pandemics coming up in the future. This is not going to be the only one. So we need to prepare ourselves for future pandemics and other types of external shocks. And I think one of the things that probably is important to stress, and that's in our report, is that we've got 9-10 months since the outbreak of the pandemic, and we're beginning to see the impact it's had on society.
Yeah.
And it's affecting different segments of society differently. There's impact on, for example, the women, on the young, on the elderly. It's much more severe, for example, than other segments of society. So we've been doing quite a big analysis of the kind of work that's been done there. And I think it's in that report also kinds of mentions that it exacerbated some of the pre-existing challenges that APEC faces, including income inequality, environmental degradation, as well as the digital divide, because the poor don't have access to digital tools or infrastructure as much as the middle class. So what needs to be done in terms of helping them in terms of reskilling and getting access to digital tools? So these are some of the things that we'll have to do quite soon.
Yeah. Denis, in recent years, we've definitely seen many nations go more toward an inward-looking posture, inward-looking stance, more toward a nationalistic type agenda, if you will, broadly speaking. Do you sense that COVID-19 and others and the economic challenges faced have started to open up, put some cracks in that, and open up people's thinking more bilaterally at this point in time? Or are we still kind of in an inward-looking phase for many countries?
Well, we know that there's been concerns of rising trade protectionism over the last 2 years. So trade was actually underperforming even before the pandemic. So I think one of the things that we're kind of hoping, partly because of the impact of the pandemic, is that we're seeing a reduction of these types of trade restrictive measures. And some of our studies are beginning to see that, particularly we're seeing more trade facilitating measures, particularly in essential medical goods. So we're beginning to see some early signs that there's less trade protectionism as we move forward. And I think what the emphasis really is that economies need to think regionally as well, and not just protecting their own economies, because if you protect your own economy and not the rest, then, who are you going to export to, right? Even if you're healthy and you're well, but if your neighbors are sick, then there's no demand for your exports. So we're all in this together.
Yeah. We had a question from Mike Ang, one of our Facebook Live viewers. The question, I'm not sure if it's one you want to discuss at all, but why is the recession not drastically affecting stock markets around the world as we see them? They seem to still retain some buoyancy. Are these types of issues discussed at all in the APEC meetings?
It is mentioned in our report. I think, personally, it's a worrying sign. There's a bit of a disconnect between particularly the stock markets and the real economy. By right, the stock markets are meant to reflect the state of the economy. I mean, one of the reasons why you're also seeing a rise in the stock markets is partly because of a very low interest rate regime in many economies. There's excess liquidity in the market. But to me, these are worrying signs, because it can lead to concerns of stock market volatilities and other things. So I think I know central banks and monetary authorities as well as regulators are looking very carefully at this.
Yeah. Dennis, your APEC Regional Trends Analysis is out, one of your flagship reports. You've been referencing part of it today during our conversation. If people want to have a closer look at that, is it easy for anyone to find and to read through? Absolutely.
I mean, if you go into the APEC website, under publications, our recent publications, you'll see it right there. We also have an APEC in chart, which is also useful to look. It's kind of a visual snapshot of where APEC stands in everything from tariffs to, we've got some interesting indicators looking at the impact of the pandemic as well. So take a look at that if you have that on our website.
Excellent. Dr. Denis Hew, Director of the APEC Policy Support Unit. Thanks so much once again for being with us on Money FM. Great to have you on, and hope to have you on again soon.
Thank you. Bye now.